Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Robert Kiyosaki wrote this book in 1997 after apparently learning financial lessons from his friend's dad, who he called his rich dad. The book basically explains how rich people don't work for money, they make money work for them. He introduces the concept of assets versus liabilities, which is really just him telling you that your fancy car isn't making you any money. The book's main point is that school teaches you nothing about money, which might explain why your straight-A friend is still broke. One of the key ideas is the rat race, where people get stuck working for money their whole lives. Kind of like a hamster on a wheel, but more taxes and coffee breaks. The controversial part, some people quote, his rich dad never existed. Seems like Robert maybe took fake it till you make it to a bit of an extreme here. Think and Grow Rich. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years interviewing 500 successful people for his 1937 book, which seems like a really long time to figure out that positive thinking helps. He interviewed big shots like Henry Ford and Thomas Edison, back when getting an interview was probably as easy as knocking on the doors and going, "Hey, you got a minute?" The book's big message is that your thoughts become your reality, which explains why I am not a millionaire. I keep thinking about lunch. Hill introduced something called the mastermind principle, where you surround yourself by smart people and supposedly get smarter through osmosis. I'm still waiting for this to work at my local coffee shop. He also talks about the power of sexual transmutation, which is basically channeling your hormones into getting rich. Yes, you heard that right. Hill literally suggested that being horny could make you wealthy. The 1930s were a wild time for self-help books. The Richest Man in Babylon. Written in 1926 by George S. Clason, this book explains personal finance through ancient Babylonian parables, because apparently modern examples were just too confusing. The main character is Arkad, the richest man in Babylon, who probably had the ancient equivalent of a Lamborghini, maybe a really fast camel with gold-plated hooves. His groundbreaking advice: save 10% of your income, live below your means, and invest wisely. Pretty revolutionary, right? What makes this book interesting is how it delivers its timeless financial advice through stories about merchants, farmers, and workers in ancient times, proving that people have been terrible with money for at least 4,000 years. The book is written like a historical fiction novel, making it the only finance book you could potentially turn in to your ancient history homework. Though I wouldn't recommend trying that unless your teacher really loves compound interest. I Will Teach You to Be Rich. Ramit Sethi wrote this book in 2009 for millennials who were tired of being told their avocado toast habit is the reason why you can't afford a house. His approach is surprisingly realistic. He admits you're going to buy that $4 coffee anyway, so he focuses on big wins instead. This book basically gives a step-by-step guide to automating your finances, negotiating like a pro, and optimizing your credit cards. It's like having a very persistent friend who won't stop talking about compound interest, except this one actually knows what they're talking about. What makes this book interesting is that Sethi isn't trying to turn you into some financial monk who meditates on spreadsheets. He's cool with you spending money how you love to. But as long as you're not 40 living out your parents' basement. He even includes scripts for negotiating with banks, which is always great if you're as awkward on the phone as I am. The Little Book of Common Sense Investing. John Bogle, founder of Vanguard, wrote this book to tell you that most active investors are basically just throwing darts at the board while charging you for the privilege. His big idea: just buy the whole market through index funds and call it a day. It's probably the most boring get-rich strategy ever, which might explain why it actually works. Bogle spends about 200 pages telling you to do less, which makes this possibly the world's most elaborate permission split to be lazy with your investments. He backs everything up with enough charts and data to make a mathematician blush, proving that finance isn't just about fancy strategies, it's just about getting rich the slow way. The book's message is simple. The more you mess with your investments, the more likely you are to mess them up. It's like telling someone the secret to winning at poker is not to play poker. The Millionaire Fastlane. MJ DeMarco wrote this after getting rich by building and selling a limousine website, which is probably not the first thing you think of when planning to build your wealth. He basically said that the traditional get a job, save money, retire at 65 is a path for suckers. He calls it the slow lane, which is a nice way of saying you're going to be eating cat food in retirement. His alternative: build a business that scales. The book is particularly savage towards the traditional financial advice industry, basically calling them all enablers of mediocrity. DeMarco argues that math doesn't care about your feelings. If you're saving 10% of your $50,000 salary, you are not going to be rich anytime soon unless you plan to live for about 200 years. He's like that one friend who tells you the uncomfortable truths, except this one built a multi-million-dollar business while everybody else was arguing the best way to save on toilet paper. The Millionaire Nextdoor. Thomas Stanley and William Danko spent 20 years studying millionaires only to discover that most of them are really boring people who live in average houses and drive Toyota Camrys. Now talk about anticlimactic. But they found that your typical millionaire is more likely to clip coupons than to drive a Ferrari, which probably explains why they are still millionaires. The book's most shocking revelation: most millionaires never made a six-figure salary. They've lived much less like you and I. It's basically a 200-page reality check that says the guy showing off his Rolex on Instagram is probably in the negative with his net worth, while your neighbor who mows his lawn might be secretly rich. They also found that most millionaires own boring businesses like welding companies or pest control services. Turns out that the real Wolf of Wall Street is the guy spraying your neighbor's house for termites. The Psychology of Money. Morgan Housel wrote this book probably after watching too many people do dumb things with their money and poor people doing smart things with their money. The book's main point is that doing well with money isn't necessarily about what you know. It's about how you behave, which explains why the super smart professor you know still can't figure out their credit card bill. Housel drops truth bombs like getting pizza and keeping money are two totally different skills. Kind of like how being good at earning pizza isn't the same as being good at not eating the whole pizza. He uses fascinating stories like how a janitor accumulated $8 million just by investing in blue chip stocks and living simply. Makes you wonder if your school janitor is secretly richer than the principal. The book's best insight: everyone's financial decisions make sense to them at that time. Even the guy who bought a timeshare in Antarctica. Broke Millennial. Aaron Lowry wrote this book for people who get anxiety attacks every time they check their bank balance, which is basically everybody under 40. Unlike other finance books that assume that you have a trust fund hiding somewhere, this one starts with the basics, like explaining what the stock market is without making you feel like you should have learned this in kindergarten. She tackles real problems like splitting bills on Venmo without losing friends, dealing with student loans that may seem bigger than the GDP of small countries, and figuring out how to afford rent and that avocado toast. The best part, she doesn't shame you for buying $5 lattes. She just helps you figure out how to budget them without living in your parents' basement until you're 50. It's like having a financially savvy best friend who will not judge you for that impulse purchase you made at 2 a.m. Same as ever. Housel's back with another book. This time he's telling us that humans have basically been making the same mistakes since we figured out how to count rocks, maybe even before that. The funny thing is that this isn't even a money book. It's more about why do humans keep doing dumb things book that involves money. He explains how the same patterns that keep showing up throughout history, like how every generation thinks that they finally figured it out right before everything blows up in their face. This book is full of stories about how people will never learn, like how we keep having financial bubbles because apparently watching other people lose their crap isn't enough. We need to try it out ourselves. And my favorite part, his explanation of how the most important events in history are the ones no one saw coming, which is basically his way of saying good luck trying to predict anything, you overconfident goofballs. The Bogelheads Guide to Investing. Imagine a bunch of investing nerds who worship John Bogle. Remember that index fund guy? Yeah, well, they got together and wrote a book. That's literally what happened here. The book is basically what you got if your super smart uncle who loves spreadsheets decided to write down everything he knows about investing, but actually makes it readable. They take Bogle's ideas about low-cost index funds and turn them into a full philosophy that even a goldfish could catch up with. And the funny part, they spend about 300 pages telling you to do basically nothing with your investments, which must be the most elaborate way to say, stop touching your money. Their main advice is to invest in everything, rebalance occasionally, and spend the rest of your time doing literally anything else. It's like meditation for your portfolio. The less you do, the better it works. Unshakeable. Tony Robbins, the guy who gets people to walk on hot coals for fun, decided to write about investing because apparently motivational speaking and firewalking aren't exciting enough. This book promises to give you an unshakable financial future, which is kind of ironic coming from a guy who's best known for getting people really shaken up at his seminars. He interviewed 50 of the world's top financial minds, probably while standing on his desk and shouting, "Yes." The best part is that when he explains market corrections using the same energy he uses to get people to jump around at his seminars, he actually makes some pretty solid points about fees, diversification, and staying calm during market crashes. Though I'm pretty sure his solution to market downturns is to do power poses while chanting positive affirmations at your portfolio statements. The Total Money Makeover. Dave Ramsey, the guy who treats credit cards like they're personally responsible for all the evil in the world, wrote this book to tell you that debt is bad. Well, okay, I knew that. However, his solution to everything is the debt snowball method, which is basically paying off your smallest debts first because sometimes math isn't as important about feeling good about yourself. The book is famous for his baby step program, which starts with saving $1,000 for emergencies and ends with having enough money to buy everyone you know a luxury car, even though he'd probably yell at you for doing that. His most controversial take is that you should never, ever, ever use credit cards, even for the points, which makes him the arch nemesis of every travel hacker out there. He suggests eating beans and rice until you're debt-free, which has probably done more for the bean industry than any marketing campaign ever could. Die with zero in your life. Bill Perkins wrote this book to tell you that dying with a fat bank account is basically leaving money on the table, or more accurately, leaving it to your ungrateful kids who probably will blow it on whatever the equivalent of NFTs are in the future. The book's main argument is that hoarding money for later is like saving all of your popcorn for the end of a movie. You might end up with lots of popcorn, but you miss the whole show. Perkins, a hedge fund manager turned poker player, because apparently one type of gambling wasn't enough, argues that we should focus on maximizing life experiences per dollar. He suggests that spending more money when you're young enough to actually enjoy it, which is either brilliant financial advice or the best marketing campaign Red Bull never wrote. The most controversial part, he says leaving an inheritance is overrated, which probably makes a lot of trust fund kids suddenly and very interested in personal finance. The Intelligent Investor, Benjamin Graham's legendary book that Warren Buffett calls the best book about investing ever written. Though, to be fair, he was probably a bit biased since Graham was his teacher. Written in 1949, when stocks were apparently traded by shouting really loud and waving papers around, the book introduces Mr. Market, an emotional guy who offers to buy and sell stocks at different prices every day based on his mood swings. Imagine having a neighbor who offers to buy your house at wildly different prices depending on whether or not they've had their morning coffee. That's basically the stock market, according to Graham. His most famous idea is the margin of safety. Basically, don't buy something unless it's so cheap that even if you're wrong, you're still kind of right. It's about wearing both a belt and a suspender, except with your money. The book is so dense that most people who own it probably just tell others they've read it. 12 Months to 1 Million. Ryan Daniel Morgan wrote this book after allegedly getting tired of all those get-rich-slow books cluttering up the shelves. His big idea? Building a $1 million business in just 12 months, which sounds about as realistic as my plan to become a professional athlete by tomorrow. But here's the twist. He actually breaks it down into somewhat reasonable steps, focusing on launching products on Amazon. The book is basically a blueprint for building a brand that sells physical products, though he makes it sound as easy as ordering it from Amazon rather than selling it. His strategy involves finding a hungry crowd, although not literally hungry. He's not suggesting you sell snacks, but by creating products they want, then scaling up faster than your credit card debt. And the funniest part, he suggests starting with just 3 products, because apparently the path to $1 million starts with the number 3. It's like a weird financial version of the 3 Little Pigs, except inside houses, you're building product listings. The Bitcoin Standard. This book was written to explain why Bitcoin is the greatest thing since sliced bread, because it is. Actually, he probably thinks sliced bread is inferior to Bitcoin too. He starts by giving us a history about money, from seashells to gold to all that stuff in your wallet, making every other form of currency sound like humanity was just practicing until we got to Bitcoin. This book is part economics textbook, part Bitcoin cultism, and part rant about how the modern financial system is basically a fancy version of monopoly money. The amusing part, he criticizes our current fiat system with such passion, you'd think regular money personally offended him. Warning, reading this might turn you into the person who can't stop talking about cryptocurrency at dinner parties. The 4-Hour Workweek. Tim Ferriss wrote this book in 2007, presumably during one of the other 164 hours of his week. His big idea: you can escape the 9-to-5 by outsourcing your entire life to virtual assistants in other countries, which is basically like having a personal army of internet minions. This book promises to teach you how to work less and make more, which sounds great until you realize Tim Ferriss probably worked about 80 hours a week writing a book about working 4 hours a week. His solution involves creating an automated business that runs while you're busy having adventures in exotic locations, though as he conveniently doesn't mention that setting up these automated systems is about as relaxing as teaching your grandparents how to use Zoom. The best part of this concept is the lifestyle design, which is basically finding ways to look rich on Instagram while paying Filipino workers to handle your email only twice a day, which might explain why he never responded to my interview request. Outwitting the Devil. Napoleon Hill wrote this book in 1938, but it wasn't published until 2011 because his family thought it was too controversial. Apparently, interviewing the actual devil about success principles was a little too spicy for the 1930s. Yeah, you heard that right. This book is literally a dialogue between Hill and Satan himself, which makes it either the most creative self-help book or proof that the Great Depression really did drive people crazy. The devil, who turns out to be surprisingly chatty, reveals all sorts of secrets about why people fail and how to avoid life's big traps. The funny part? Satan comes across as more of a slightly grumpy life coach than the Prince of Darkness. Hill basically got the devil to explain why procrastination, fear, and negative thinking are bad, which feels like getting a parking ticket explained by Darth Vader. The book's main message is that drifting through life without purpose is the surest way to fail, though I'm not sure we needed Satan to tell us that. If you enjoyed this video about financial wisdom and satanic success principles, hit that subscribe button. Or don't, maybe that's what the devil wants you to do. Just kidding. Or am I?